After many unsuccessful blind dates, my mother quickly arranged a marriage for me with a long-haired, good-looking guy. He was the best-looking person I had ever met, but I hated the fact that he always wore a mask of hypocrisy, so I never gave him a good look. Even though he was a good and virtuous partner, who knew that on the first night of our marriage, I would run into my new husband at a nightclub. Watching the man skillfully spit out smoke rings and flirt with the gigolos in the nightclub, I suddenly realized that he looked more like a one than I did. What was going on? I froze in the middle of hanging up my clothes, frowning as I watched the scene in front of me. My father was sitting on the sofa in the main seat, while my mother was sitting next to him with an extremely beautiful girl. There was also a middle-aged couple sitting on the other side. Before my parents could say anything, the middle-aged couple politely came forward and greeted me. "Oh, this must be Xiao Ming. You really are a good-looking young man." My frown grew tighter and tighter, and I avoided their attempts to shake hands. My avoidance was obvious, and the couple froze awkwardly in place. The situation got out of hand for a moment, and I caught a glimpse in the corner of my eye of the very pretty girl flashing a gloating smile, before it disappeared again. My mother came out to smooth things over. "Cheng, these are Xiao Li's parents, Uncle and Auntie Xia." Xiao Li! No matter how slow I am, I realized that this was a blind date set up by my parents for me. How many times this month was this? I couldn't even remember. I don't understand why they are always so keen to get me married. I stared expressionlessly at this person called Xiao Li. Xia Li's parents gave him a heavy tap and said, "Xia Li, say hello." Xia Li's unsuspecting expression vanished in an instant, and then he obediently stood up and said, "Hello, Xiao Ming, my name is Xia Li." Not to mention how Xia Li, with his pretty androgynous face, could produce such a low and hoarse voice. And why is Xia Li taller than me? It was obvious that Xia Li was not a pretty girl, but a pretty man. I put my fingers against my temples and rubbed them vigorously, asking, "Mom, what do you mean?" My mother was a little guilty at first, but then she became righteous. "I'm introducing you to a marriage partner." I suppressed my anger and said, "A man." My mother was not at all flustered and replied, "So what? Mum is only thinking of your best interests. You didn't like any of the marriage partners she arranged for you before, so she's wondering if you might like a man. I've specially selected the most suitable little gift for you." My anger level gradually rose. I could tolerate her taking matters into her own hands and arranging a marriage for me before. How long has it been? And now she's taken matters into her own hands again and found me a man. Thinking about this, my anger level reached 100%. I asked loudly, "Mum, is Huading going out of business or is our family going bankrupt? You're so eager to get me married off." The Xie family was already considered an excellent match for my family, but hearing my implied words, Xie Li's parents could no longer sit still on the sofa. Xie Li, on the other hand, remained motionless like a pretty doll, with no expression on his face. My mother smiled awkwardly, took Xie Li's hand and comforted him. "Xie Li, don't listen to him." Xie Li nodded and gave my mother a smile. Although he didn't say anything, his pretty face made my mother extremely happy. I sneered and thought to myself, I never thought that nowadays men would still use feminine wiles. At that moment my father spoke. "Mingcheng, you cannot refuse this marriage. You will get married today, whether you want to or not." I didn't stay long. I got dressed and slammed the door behind me. In the hallway of the manor, Xie Li held onto the corner of my trench coat. Without turning around, I impatiently said, "Get lost." Feeling the strength of the tug on my clothes had not disappeared, I turned around unhappily. The autumn wind lifted Xie Li's hair, and his whole body, in the dim light and in the gentle breeze, was so beautiful it didn't look real. I'd changed my mind. I picked up a lock of Xie Li's hair that hung down by his shoulder and said contemptuously, "Xie Li?" He nodded obediently. "I really don't know if your father or your mother is crazy, naming you Xie Li." A strange emotion quickly flashed across Xie Li's pair of sparkling peach eyes. Although his anger was fleeting, I still sensed it keenly. I continued to pour oil on the fire. So you're named Xieli, and you've really become a reward for the family's interests? Xieli, however, curved his eyes and smiled, saying, I am honored to be able to serve as a gift to General Xiaoming. Hypocrisy, disgusting. He clearly didn't want the marriage, and clearly hated me. But he pretended to be obedient and submissive. I lost my sudden interest and turned to leave. Xieli, however, called out to me, General Xiaoming, you need a wife, and I need the help that Huading can bring. And I bet I'll be the wife that satisfies you the most. Why wouldn't you want to marry me? Xieli's proposal did make my heart flutter, but I wickedly felt his crotch and teased him, saying, But can you satisfy me? Xieli calmly leaned in close to me, and his breath was hot as it sprayed into my ear on the cool autumn night. It was damp and hot. Xiao Mingzong, how will you know if you don't try? My peripheral vision caught his clenched fist, and suddenly I asked, Xieli, is this how you've always been? Xieli maintained his position close to me, but I could clearly feel his body stiffen. He asked, How? I brushed the leaves off his shoulder with my hand and sneered, acting like this. Xieli didn't say anything, his face pale and unsteady. The change was so deliberate, but I didn't figure out what kind of trick he was playing. I wasn't afraid of left and right, so I took his arm and helped him up. Xieli pretended to be weak and fell into my arms, saying softly, Xiao Ming, how can you say that about me? His legs gave way and he pretended to fall again. I lifted him up speechlessly, his firm muscles squeezing my hand as if I were holding a stone. It's really interesting. Standing up, he is taller than me, and his muscles are more developed than mine. He is eager to serve me as a zero. I carefully examine the half of Xieli's face that is revealed as I return to my arms. In the moonlight, his face is breathtakingly beautiful. Leaving aside everything else, Xieli's face is indeed the most beautiful of all the people I have ever seen, without exception. For a moment, I seemed to understand why my mother chose Xieli to marry into my family. It was clear that the Xie family was just a small family that had fallen on hard times. Oh, I knew Cheng Cheng would like Shaoli. He was just being polite. Suddenly, my mother's voice drifted into my ears on the wind. I turned my head and saw my parents and Xieli's parents, who had emerged from nowhere. I turned back to see Xieli in my arms, and I knew what was going on. In such an ambiguous position, I couldn't imagine what it would look like to my mother. I pushed him away neatly and pulled a mocking smile. Xieli, you really have a good plan. Xieli looked at me innocently and pursed his lips. At this moment, my disgust for Xieli had reached its peak. The next morning, I was at the office dealing with work when my assistant suddenly knocked on the door. I looked up but saw that my assistant was so embarrassed that he didn't know how to speak. I took the initiative to ask, What's wrong? After a moment's hesitation, my assistant said, There's someone downstairs who claims to be your fiancé. What do you think? Fiancé? Xieli's bright and attractive face quickly flashed through my mind, followed by the little trick he played last night. I frowned in displeasure. What did he want? What was he up to? My assistant was waiting for my response, but I wanted to see what else he had up his sleeve. Send him up. Soon the door was knocked on again. I let Xieli in without even glancing at him. I didn't like him, and I was giving him a hard time. He knew it, and I knew it. Xieli couldn't hold back any longer and said, Mr. Xiaoming, I got up early and ground the coffee myself. Would you like to try some? The aroma of the coffee made my tired mind start to come alive. I didn't hesitate, and I took the coffee he handed me and sipped it slowly. But after just one sip, I could tell. I stared at him with a half smile, feigning confusion, and said, I had no idea that Master Xie's skills were exactly the same as those of the coffee shop downstairs. Xieli was not embarrassed by my revelation, but instead laughed and said, I heard earlier that manager Xiao Ming likes the latte downstairs at Huading, and now I think that he not only likes it, he is an expert. It was worth me queuing up for coffee in the morning. I like it when Xiao Ming always does. I rolled my eyes. Xieli never tells the truth. it's really off-putting. Anyway, his mouth belongs to him, so whatever he says is reasonable. But that's not what I want to talk about, it's fiancé? When did Mingqing get a fiancé, and how come I didn't know about it? I spoke with a tone of certain doubt, waiting for Xieli's speechless expression. Unexpectedly, Xieli calmly pulled out a document. It was a document with my handwritten signature agreeing to marry Xieli. In a flash, I remembered a medical examination document that my mother had asked me to sign. I laughed angrily. Xieli suddenly stopped pretending, sat on my desk, and elegantly drank the coffee I had just drunk, provoking me. Xiao Mingzong? Fiancé? Husband? He paused for a moment, and then said in a very annoying voice, "What do you think I should call you?" Xieli and I still got married, even though I particularly disliked him. My original intention was to get married abroad with Xieli, but my parents insisted on a big celebration. They said that not being able to get married in China was already a grievance for Xieli, and that we must never let him down at the wedding. Since we were already getting married to please them, why cause any more trouble with them at the wedding? On the day of the wedding, the Ming and Xie families made the headlines. Under the blinding spotlight, I said to the priest, "I do." Xieli was even more exaggerated, with tears in the corners of his eyes. Sigh, what a show-off. Amidst the commotion, I perfunctorily kissed Xieli's lips. Although it was a fleeting touch, I thought to myself, his lips are really soft. That night, Xieli moved into my house with a small suitcase. On the day of my adulthood, I moved out of the Ming family manor and lived in my own villa in the Yew Garden. For me, this villa was my home, my own home, and the thought of a stranger living in my house made me feel uncomfortable. I gave Xieli a random room and started to set rules for him. Don't go into my room. Don't touch my things. Behave yourself. Xieli obediently said that he understood, and I didn't want to see his pretense of obedience face anymore, so I turned around and went back to my room. Unexpectedly, as soon as I entered my room, I received a WeChat message from Xiaolin Yuran asking me to go out for a drink. Drinking late at night was not my habit, but the moment my eyes fell on the wedding photo of Xieli and me on the wall, a feeling of annoyance welled up in me. I lit a cigarette impatiently, and when the nicotine entered my lungs, I momentarily lost my mind. I don't understand why my parents are forcing me to get married. I used to think they wanted me to carry on the family line, but now they'd rather I marry a man who can't have children. I don't understand, can't I live without getting married? The more I thought about it, the more annoyed I became, and I decided to go to Lin Yuran's appointment. The sound of the sports car's ignition attracted Xieli. He stood obediently next to the car in his pajamas, bending down gently and asking, "Honey, where are you going so late?" Honey, how can he be so thick-skinned? I motioned for him to come closer, deliberately blowing smoke circles at him, and he looked as if he'd been choked. I sneered, "If you can't even smoke, are you even a man?" Xieli's expression didn't change, and he continued to lower his eyebrows and eyes as usual. This is so uninspiring. I exhaled a puff of smoke and said indifferently, "It's none of your business where I go. Just mind your own business. Don't really think that just because you're married to me, you're my wife. We both know how this marriage came about. It was just a transaction between us that neither of us wanted." After saying this, I left Xieli and drove away. Wow, let me see who this is. Isn't this our handsome groom? As soon as I entered the bar, Lin Yuran started fanning the flames in my ear. I was too annoyed to tell him to go away. I just kept drinking expensive whiskey glass after glass, as Lin Yuran was paying the bill. After 3 rounds of wine, I looked around with a blurred vision. Under the flickering lights, there was a man who looked a lot like Xieli. He was expertly blowing smoke rings and flirting with the bull dyke next to him. No matter how I looked at it, this man looked a lot like Xieli. But isn't Xieli at home, playing the virtuous wife? But doesn't Xieli not know how to smoke, and did I choke on smoke because of him? But isn't Xieli zero? Countless reasons frantically denied that the man not far away was Xieli. However, Lin Yuran did not give me the chance to deny it, and blurted out. Hey, Mingqing, isn't that your new husband? You two are quite the interesting couple, returning the nightclub on your wedding night. My confused mind suddenly cleared up. This really is Xieli. The man in front of me, who looks even more like one than I do, is Xieli. Lin Yuran was still rambling on and on. Your new husband really is good-looking. Look at how many people are around him. And look at you. I'm the only one who's still with you. Mingqing, your charm is really no match for what it was back then. I felt my temples throbbing, and my head was about to explode. I rudely interrupted Lin Yuran. If you don't know what to say, just shut up. Lin Yuran has never been afraid of me, and continued to add fuel to the fire. That's the way it is, and you don't even care. Where does that put you? It's like this on the first day of marriage. What's going to happen in the future? Under Lin Yuran's influence, I got up and went over to Xieli. At that moment, Xieli was lighting a cigarette in his mouth with the fire in the cowherd's hands. The lighting was ambiguous, and the atmosphere was hot. I looked down at Xieli from a position of superiority. Xieli, you can't even fake it on the first day? Xieli saw me but didn't react, calmly smoking the cigarette between his index and middle fingers. With the other hand, he put his arm around Niulong, who was standing next to him. I knew that Xieli had been faking it before. That was the reason I hated him the most. He clearly had the face I liked the most, but he was not what he appeared to be. That's why I hated him even more. But now, by acting like a good boy, he has successfully gotten what he wants. Why shouldn't he keep acting? He has to act whether he wants to or not. Seeing that my face was getting worse and worse, Lin Yuran stepped in to smooth things over. Xieli, what's wrong with you? Apologized to Mingqing. Xieli, who had been indifferent, laughed instead when he heard Lin Yuran's words. He got up close to me and imitated the way I had previously choked him with the cigarette, choking him back. As I coughed violently, he leaned close to my ear and whispered, Apologize. I squinted at his face, which was full of disdain and mockery. I'm sorry. His tone was extremely perfunctory, just like the kiss I had given at the wedding. My anger rose and my hands, hanging down at my sides, curled up involuntarily. I gritted my teeth and said, Go home while I'm still in a good mood. Xieli ignored the anger in my words and continued to provoke me, saying, Go home? Go home to which family? Oh, I remember, we're married. We were originally tricked into getting married, and Xieli was so sarcastic. I couldn't hold back any longer, and I clenched my fists and punched Xieli hard in the face. I warned him, Xieli, we're only getting married now, and the Huading group hasn't invested in the Xie family yet. When Xieli heard what I said, a strange light flashed in his eyes. I didn't have time to think about it, because Xieli turned around and hit me. This completely angered me, and I rolled up my sleeves and pounced on him. For a moment, the scene was in complete chaos. Xieli still had some reservations, and was quickly pinned under me. I pressed myself against his body and whispered in his ear, Xieli, I'm not at all curious about you as a person, and I don't care what you want. But there is one thing you should remember. Xieli licked the blood at the corner of his mouth and looked at me. His eyes were still smiling, but the sharpness hidden in the depths of his eyes, which was hidden by the smile, was unmistakable. A few seconds later, I found my voice again. Just behave like a pretty vase in the Ming family. After that night, Xieli resumed his role as a gentle, virtuous partner. Occasionally, we would sit down calmly at the same table to eat. I just couldn't understand why he had provoked me at the nightclub. What was his reason for doing so? My curiosity was like a cat scratching at my heart, urging me to find out. But I had already made a grandiose boast about not being interested in him. So I tried my best to resist my desires. But it seemed that the heavens could not bear to see me suffer from the torment of curiosity. So they sent the opportunity to learn the truth right to my eyes. Xieli's father invited me to visit the family. I didn't really want to go, especially when I thought about how obsequiously Xieli's parents would act. But after all, they were my in-laws. And I was always a decent person. After much deliberation, I agreed to go to the Sie's house at the weekend. When I got home in the evening, Sieli was cooking in an apron. He had been doing this recently, preparing my meals on time every day. I didn't know if it was an act or if he really meant it. But there was only one thing I needed to know, and that was that he had taken my warning to heart. Not many people could understand what I was saying. Sieli was obviously one of those people. To be honest, Sieli really did suit me down to the ground, especially as he had a face I liked. Unfortunately, what I hated most was a phony, and Sieli was the biggest phony I had ever met. After dinner, I leaned against the doorframe and watched Sieli wash the dishes. I casually informed him, "I'm going to your house this weekend." Sieli's movements did not pause. Accompanied by the sound of splashing water, he said indifferently, "Oh, I know. I suppose so, he must have known before me. It's no fun. I've already delivered the message." I shrugged my shoulders and turned to leave, but I heard Sieli call out to me, "Mingcheng, can you not go?" I looked back in surprise, but all I saw was Sieli's lowered eyes. In the silence, I raised a bright smile and said, "No." Seeing Sieli's obviously unnatural expression, I laughed even more happily. "I don't care what you Xie family are hiding. As long as it makes me unhappy, I'll return it all. Don't want to go back to the Xie family? Then I'll go." The afternoon we set off for the Xie families was a rare sunny day. Sieli and I shared the same car, but there was a distance between us like the River Chu and the Han River. It wasn't until we were about to arrive at the Xie families that I glanced at Sieli. He was sitting upright, looking out the window and wondering what to think. His prominent brows were reflected in the car window, and his long hair covered his face wantonly. Strangely, I felt sorry for him. Lonely. A word popped into my head. Maybe I stared at him for too long. Sieli suddenly turned around and our gazes met. He smiled and said, "If you want to look at me, just say so, there's no need to peek." I was spying on him. Ridiculous. I must have been mistaken. Although the Xie family doesn't live in a manner like my family, the villa they live in is also in a prime location. I vaguely remember that the housing prices here are also extremely expensive. There is also a swimming pool in the courtyard. But for some reason, Sieli suddenly shivered. I followed his gaze and took a closer look at the pool. It was very large, very deep, and the water was very clear. The Xie family, who had been waiting for a long time, hurried out to greet them when they heard a noise. "I'm so grateful that you could come to my humble abode, Mr. Ming." Xie Bingran, Sieli's father, is already over 50 years old. But the wrinkles from his smile look like a blooming chrysanthemum. I politely said, "Uncle Xie, you're really embarrassing the junior. Sieli and I are legally married, and you're Sieli's father. I can't bear to address you as Mr. Ming. Uncle Xie, you can just call me Mingcheng." Xie Bingran kept shaking his head. "That won't do. The Xie family still relies on General Ming. I dare not." I sneered to myself while no one was looking. Hypocrite. After I had finished sneering, I saw Sieli smiling at me. For a moment, all the sounds around us faded away. It seemed that sneering at the Xie family had become our secret. A secret that was shared and belonged only to us. Xie Bingran ushered us to the dining room. Naturally, he treated me as the host, but he seated Sieli in a remote corner. I frowned and said unhappily, "Sieli, come here. Sit next to me." After all, Sieli was my person, so how could he sit there? Xie Bingran also realized his mistake and first apologized to me. "I'm sorry, Ming. Look at me, what a memory. I even arranged Sieli in his original position." Then he immediately instructed Sieli. "Sieli, you too. Why don't you sit next to General Ming yourself?" Original position? Is Sieli not to the liking of the Xie family? How can I blame Sieli for this? Sieli hung his head and didn't say a word, then obediently moved the stool and sat on my right. Seeing him like this, I was furious. Here we go again, acting obedient. If just now I was only wondering if Sieli wasn't to the liking of the family, then the next moment I was certain of it. Every dish served on the table was seafood. And Xieli is allergic to seafood. I put down my chopsticks and asked bluntly, Xieli is allergic to seafood, didn't you know? There isn't a single dish he can eat. Who do you want to starve to death? Before I finished speaking, Xieli looked up at me first, his eyes full of disbelief. It was so unbelievable that it made me, who had been eating with him for a long time, feel unsure of myself. Was I wrong? But he clearly doesn't eat seafood. He got a rash from just one sip of fish soup at the wedding. The large restaurant fell silent, an odd atmosphere pervading. At that moment, I finally understood the purpose of this dinner. It was to test the weight of Xieli's gratitude in my heart. Obviously, I knew better than the Xie family that Xieli was allergic to seafood. This confirmed the status of Xieli in my heart. It's quite good. The Xie family really surprised me. They had me figured out. I let out a long sigh and suddenly felt very tired. Xie Bingran noticed my fatigue and impatience, and carefully suggested, Mr. Ming, do you want to go to Xieli's room to rest? I looked at the table full of seafood and nodded after a while. Okay, I want to see what other tricks are waiting for me. Xieli took me to his room, but he took the wrong way. It's really strange that he could get lost in his own home. After finally reaching Xieli's room, I pushed open the door and tried to push Xieli out. I just want to be alone for a while. Xieli pushed against the door but asked me, Mingqing, how did you know that I'm allergic to seafood? How dare he mention that? My lungs were about to explode, and he was adding fuel to the fire? Strangely, after staring intently into Xieli's eyes for a long time, my anger slowly subsided. Xieli was waiting anxiously for my answer. I said slowly, I'm not blind, you never eat seafood. Xieli was silent for a long time, and then he muttered, Really? But I've only been having dinner with you for a few days. I took advantage of Xieli's moment of distraction to lock him out of the door. This was the first time I had entered a man's room other than Lin Yuran's. I looked around curiously. For some reason, I felt very uncomfortable in this room. Finally, when my fingers touched the paint on the wall that had not yet dried, I figured it out. The Xie family really wanted to test the weight of Xieli in my heart. But they didn't use seafood, which is why Xieli was shocked that I knew about his seafood allergy. And the reason Xieli took the wrong way was because this was not his room at all. It was a newly decorated room, designed to make up for the fact that Xieli's room was not taken seriously. I opened the door, and Xieli was nowhere to be seen. The urgency to confirm whether my suspicions were true made me look for Xieli. Finally, I found Xieli in the swimming pool. Using the flowers as cover, I saw the abused Xieli. Xie Fei, his own brother, had pushed him into the pool. Xie Bingran's voice came to my ears. Xieli, have you served Mingqing well or not? Why hasn't Huading invested in the Xie family yet? If it weren't for the fact that you have a presentable face, I would have long since stopped supporting you, and you wouldn't even be Xieli. What did he mean? What did Xie Bingran mean? The message was so overwhelming that I was too shocked to think. Xieli didn't say anything, and was pushed under the water again, making bubbling sounds. Xie Bingran continued, You'd better be grateful for being raised and behave yourself as the Xie family's gift. After saying this, Xie Bingran let go of Xieli and left the swimming pool with Xie Fei. The air was so quiet that you could only hear the wind. Xieli coughed and spit out some water, and weakly said, Mingqing, I want to go home. Without thinking about when Xieli had noticed me in the bushes, I reflexively rushed out and picked up Xieli on the ground. He was lying wet by the pool, like a beautiful puppy that had been abandoned. He clung tightly to the shirt on my chest and said with difficulty, Go home, okay? I didn't even bother to find an excuse, and I left my dignity behind. I took Xieli's gratitude and left the Xie family in front of the whole family. Before I left, I said to Xie Bingran, Since Uncle Xie treated Xieli like this, I have to think carefully about the cooperation between the Xie and Xie families. On the way home, I stared at Xieli, whose eyes were tightly closed, and said coldly, Don't pretend, you're already out of the Xie family. Cieli stopped pretending and immediately sat up from my arms. There was no trace of the weakness I had just seen. He wiped the water from his forehead and said with a smile, "When did you notice?" Outside the window, the shadows of the trees flashed past, while inside the car, Cieli and I faced each other. From the beginning, from Xie Bingran to Xie Fei, and then to me, we have all done what you wanted us to do, and we have seen what you wanted us to see, haven't we? Cieli didn't say anything but just asked me, "Mingqing, do you want to hear a story?" 25 years ago, the Shu family was on the verge of bankruptcy and about to be cornered. The Shu family had a beautiful eldest daughter, Shu Yan. Xie Bingran, the young master of the Xie family, who had longed for Shu Yan for a long time, pretended to be righteous and gave assistance to the Shu family. The Shu family rescued the Shu family, which was on the verge of collapse, so Shu Yan became Xie Bingran's wife as a thank you. Even though Xie Bingran already had a family, later, Shu Yan, who had no name or status, gave birth to Cieli and jumped from the top floor of the hospital on the night of Xieli's birth. The Shu family did not survive the winter either and went bankrupt. In the cycle of cause and effect, 25 years later, the Xie family followed the same path as the Shu family. On the eve of being cornered, Xie Bingran could not bear to trade his children for profit and released Cieli. Hua Ting invested in the Xie family, so Cieli became a gift of thanks to the Ming family. Shili, who is giving thanks to whom, and who has become the objectified thanks. The story of Cieli is over. I suddenly remembered that the first time I confronted Cieli, I said, "I really don't know if your father or your mother is lacking in common sense, giving you the name Cieli. I think Cieli's name was just the name that Xie Bingran wanted to humiliate the Shu family for his own selfish desires." That day I also said, "If your name is Cieli, does that really mean you have become the family's Cieli?" If possible, Cieli just wanted to be a child loved by his family. Obviously, they were all Xie Bingran's children, but he was bullied from a young age, and his status was even lower than that of a servant. He was underfed and underdressed, beaten and scolded, and had to do hard labor. After growing up, he was treated like a bargaining chip and sold. Cieli smiled cheerfully, with no trace of gloom on his face. He was waiting for me to speak first. I suppressed the pain in my heart brought on by the compassion rising up inside me, and asked coldly, "So what? What do you mean by telling me about your miserable past?" Cieli lowered his eyelids, and after a long time he spoke slowly. "I hope you won't hate me. I hope you understand that I had no choice but to put on a show. If I hadn't learned to pretend, I wouldn't even have had a chance to grow up." "But why? Cieli, why do you hope I won't hate you? Why do you hope that I can understand your difficulties?" I didn't ask why again. Because I knew. It was because of the undetected seafood allergy that had gone unnoticed for days, months, years, and decades. Unconsciously, the prejudice in my heart was let go. I opened my heart and asked him, "Why did the nightclub anger me? Do you want to use me against the Xie family?" Cieli shook his head and answered honestly, "No, I want to test where your bottom line is, where your tolerance is. And your attitude towards the Xie family is an indispensable part of my strategy against them." Cieli's long hair was still dripping. I threw him the handkerchief I was carrying and snorted, "You really do have everyone figured out." Cieli took the handkerchief, first looked at it in surprise, and then smiled sincerely from the bottom of his heart. He knew that this was a sign of reconciliation between him and me. Instead of wiping the water droplets off with the handkerchief, he treasured it like a treasure and said earnestly, "Mingqing, you really are a very good person, really." After reconciling with Cieli, he became even more virtuous than before, and directly took care of my 3 meals a day, transforming into a hard-working little kitchen maid. He went to the company every day to bring me my meals without getting tired of it. General Ming is really lucky to have such a good-looking person delivering his lunch every day. I'm tired of hearing things like this at work. Although Cieli's cooking is delicious, I can't help but say. After I've finished the last bite of rice, I say to him, "Cieli, do you have nothing better to do every day?" Don't you have to find a way to make the Xie family go bankrupt? Xieli doesn't take it seriously and casually says, "My biggest supporter is here, so I have to be nice to him, don't I?" He was right. As long as I didn't sign the contract to inject capital into the Xie family, the family would go bankrupt sooner or later. But I always felt that Xieli would never let the Xie family go bankrupt so easily. Sure enough, not long after, my assistant brought me a thick stack of documents. "Manager Ming, I think you need to take a look at this document." I took the document and read it carefully. The document was full of incriminating evidence against the Xie family, Xie Bingran and Xie Fei. This document must have been written by Xieli. I just realized that Xieli never intended to use me. He was forced to marry me, and had to pretend to be obedient in order to conceal his identity. From the very beginning, he planned to personally push the Xie family into the abyss. But now, Xie Bingran's evidence has fallen into my hands. That proves that Xieli has been exposed. But still, I harbor a glimmer of hope and anxiously ask, where is Xieli? Did Xieli send it? He didn't come to dinner today, but he did send the documents. My assistant spoke with difficulty. "General Ming, this document was signed for by the receptionist as a courier delivery. As for young Master Xie, he didn't come today. A skinny camel is still bigger than a horse. I dare not imagine what will happen to Xieli, who has openly gone against the Xie family, if he falls into Xie Bingran's hands. Especially as I'm not sure if Xieli is capable of protecting himself. I dare not take the risk. Even if there is the slightest uncertainty, I don't want Xieli to get hurt." So when I received Xie Bingran's message telling me to go to the hotel alone, I didn't think twice. I drove to the designated hotel without bringing anything. Unexpectedly, there was only Xie Bingran in the room. Unexpectedly, he was not as furious as I expected, but instead he was servilely apologizing and smiling. It's not that I look down on him, but the occasional shrewdness and calculation in his eyes makes me feel disgusted. I said coldly, "Where is the gift?" Instead of answering me about where the gift was, Xie Bingran asked me a very strange question. "Do you absolutely need a gift? Can't it be someone else?" I didn't answer him either, but just kept repeating, "Where is the gift?" My repetition was taken as a reply to him in Xie Bingran's eyes. He put away his smile and shouted at the person in the bedroom, "Come out." There was more than just Xie Bingran in the room. I looked warily into the bedroom. The person who came out was just Xie Fei, and I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. I assumed that the father and son wouldn't dare do anything to me. I impatiently asked again. "I'll ask again, where's the gift?" Xie Fei suddenly hugged me. I reflexively tried to break free, but I had no strength left. My feeble shoving was more like playing hard to get. Xie Fei pressed herself excitedly against me. At that moment, Xie Bingran spoke. "Mingcheng, it doesn't matter who you sleep with. It's better to sleep with Xie Fei. She will be good to you." Xie Fei's hot, wet breath made me feel sick to my stomach, and the close distance finally allowed me to take a good look at this man. He is clearly Xieli's brother, but he looks nothing like Xieli, not even 1/10,000th as good-looking. Although I was drugged, I was not afraid at all and mocked. "Xieli at least has a good-looking face, but your eldest son is not even 1/10,000th as good-looking as Xieli, and he is also foolish. It seems that your genes really need to be improved." Xie Bingran's anger shot out of his eyes. For the first time, I felt that he was a bit of a man. Unfortunately, I pronounced, "The Ming family's bodyguards will arrive in 3 minutes. If you have any more tricks, then use them quickly. Oh yes, if you want to have sex, then the prerequisite is that you are a third-rate man." Not only Xie Bingran, but Xie Fei also began to become angry. Xie Fei shouted, "Ming Cheng, Xieli, that little brat, you don't want to know where he is. I don't need you to tell me. I'll find him myself." 3 minutes later, the bodyguards broke down the door. What cowards, what losers. I gave them time and expended so much effort. In the end, they didn't do anything, and I didn't find out anything. Fortunately, Xie Bingran only gave me the disarming powder, so I'm not in any danger. I continued to search for Cieli. A week later, I found Cieli. He was at the Xie residence, hidden in his old room. It was a dark attic. There was no light and no one was there. That was where Cieli grew up. For some reason, my heart ached. Cieli weakly raised his arm to wipe away the tears in the corner of my eye. I had tears in my eyes. Cieli smiled weakly, his voice breaking. Mingqing, I'm sorry, I was careless and got caught. I've caused you trouble. What a sicko. What's the point of saying such decent things at a time like this? But I still responded softly to him. No, it's no trouble. You're my husband after all. Perhaps my arrival made Cieli feel more relaxed, because he stopped insisting. A second before he closed his eyes, he said, Mingqing, I'm not pretending this time. I know, Cieli. I've known for a long time. Cieli was sent to the ICU. The prolonged water outage had left his body in a state of extreme weakness. During this time, while I was at the hospital keeping watch over him, I began to deal with the Xie family myself. The Xie family soon found themselves in a desperate situation, and Xie Bingran went from having black hair to white hair overnight. He knelt on the ground and begged me desperately, asking if I could show leniency for the sake of Cieli. Desperate times call for desperate measures. The Xie family owes its current situation entirely to Cieli. He even had the audacity to ask if I could save the family because of the marriage between Cieli and me. Thinking about Cieli's injustice, I gave him an idea. Uncle Xie is still considered half of my family, so I will point out a way out for you. If you are willing to put all the blame on Xie Fei, I will save the Xie family. How about it? Why should Xie Fei be treated as an object to be traded for benefits that will help the Xie family, when she is also a child of the Xie family? And Xie Fei can feel justified in being the apple of the Xie family's eye, and even take pleasure in bullying Cieli. After hearing what I had to say, Xie Bingran was silent, and eventually staggered away. I thought that Xie Bingran would sacrifice Xie Fei to take the blame for the crime, for the sake of the Xie family. Unexpectedly, Xie Bingran took all the blame himself. Although this cannot save the Xie family, it can protect his children from going to prison. After learning of Xie Bingran's choice, I felt extremely ironic. It turns out that Xie Bingran can also be a good father. With Xie Bingran's imprisonment, the Xie family also went bankrupt. The day Xie Bingran went to prison, Cieli opened his eyes. The bright sunshine outlined Cieli's hazy silhouette. I couldn't help but stroke the face that had amazed me the first time I saw it. Cieli tilted his head and kissed the palm of my hand, his kiss serious and reverent. The dense kisses didn't seem to land on my palm, but rather on my heart. They left a deep mark. My heart was beating violently. Cieli looked me earnestly in the eyes and said, Mingqing, I really thank you. I was truly happy for Cieli, and gently stroked his eyelids, saying, Cieli, I wish you freedom. From now on, you are no longer anyone's Cieli. You are your own person. Cieli's eyes welled up with tears. If the shadows of his past had gradually faded with the bankruptcy of the Xie family, then at this moment, Mingqing had wiped away the last of it with his own hands. Mingqing! His voice rose and I responded gently. The next moment, Cieli kissed me. His kiss was fierce and urgent, and I was forced to retreat step by step. Between my lips, I closed my eyes and immersed myself in this kiss. Mingqing! Mingqing! Cieli suddenly stopped, and I opened my eyes and looked at him. I like you. His voice was very soft, but I felt deafening. After a long time, I hummed a sound with my breath. Cieli bit my lip in dissatisfaction. My thoughts were in a daze. In that daze, I thought about the first time I met Cieli. At that time, I was so amazed by him that I could not find the words to express my feelings. It was also because I liked him at first sight that I especially disliked his pretentiousness. In fact, I also like him. I carefully licked his lips, unlike the perfunctory way I did on the wedding day. Instead, I did it carefully and meticulously. I like you too,